Today I had the pleasure of sitting down with Leanne Bats. Leanne is the founder of ReFi Labs and co-author of the ERC-Cool Standard, which is looking to embed climate action through funding carbon removal technologies into the cultural fabric of Web3. It's the new ERC-721 standard. Had an amazing conversation. It's ranged from her background, getting into climate, getting into Web3, her history in marketing and psychology, as well as a sport lover and a football player, delving into some of the nuances of how we can galvanize climate action we need to see to make this transition that we're all facing, really kind of keying in on the power of storytelling and the power of culture making to do that. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy the conversation with Leanne. Welcome to the ReFi podcast. Can we start out by just learning a bit about you, your story, your background?
Yeah, 100%. Gosh, it all starts like it's funny to be on a ReFi podcast for a start, but we'll get to how I guess I ended up here. But I come from, I'm a Kiwi, I'm a New Zealander, lived in this small corner of the world for much of my life, studied commerce, marketing, and psychology at university, and actually always was an athlete or a sport lover at heart. I represented New Zealand at football or soccer to some of our market, and just really loved sport through my youth. Came out of uni, went straight into the pharmaceutical industry of all things, which was a traditional good career path at the time. It was well paid, well looked after, and meaningful work. You got to help patients and really look at well-being. But I just felt there was no room for sort of creativity. It was very highly regulated. As a marketer, you sort of just had to carbon copy everything else. So it always felt kind of not right for me, that I wasn't really looking to spend 40 years of my life or 50 years of my life working, kind of going on this career path. So I actually left to try and follow my dream of finding work in sport, which actually led me to Canada in 2015, where I landed my first gig working for FC Barcelona in Canada. So as a footballer, that was sort of like, okay, this is good. I've landed in a good place. And what it was actually their training camps. They train youth all around the world, and it's as much commercial as there's anything else about sort of brand building and lifetime values. If you get them at 6-year-old, they're a fan from then. It's hugely lucrative. So we were training these children throughout Canada, and I sort of learned the ropes over those 6 weeks, and managed to get the license to bring it back to Australia and New Zealand to roll it out there. And I think that was probably my first taste of being like a founder or an entrepreneur, and kind of the freedom to run my own business. I was sort of N equals one, and went out and could operate all on my own. Which is kind of one of those things that once you get, it's hard to ever go back and go the other way, I think. So it's sort of like a one-way pathway. But being a Kiwi and being a New Zealander the whole time while I was doing this, I sort of had in the back of my mind, the All Blacks rugby. This is exactly what they need. They're a national team, but have an international following. And I just thought this was the perfect kind of vehicle for them. So actually, when I landed back in New Zealand, I went knocking on their door and pitched to them saying, I've been doing this work for FC Barcelona. You need to do the same thing. And I was lucky with timing, basically, because they had started down this journey, but they didn't have kind of the know-how and internal knowledge. So that's how I got under the hood there, and wrote up the business plan for them. And I've sort of never looked back. I've been in touch with them ever since, working, on and off. But at the time that I came back and pitched them, I was 36 weeks pregnant, so it wasn't far off having my son. But yeah, that sort of brings me nearly to where I've got to today, without touching on obviously Web3 and climate yet. But
yeah, so I mean, the World Cup is on right now, right? And I'm reconnecting with some deep love of, what do you think it is about sport that's
beautiful
just
game.
So?
Yeah.
I mean, football for sure, but sports as well.
Yeah.
It just seems like every country just has this like deep-seated love for competition and for
That's it.
play, right?
I think like there's real kind of connection here to Web3, what we're finding out of Web3, and like it's a buzzword, but it's community, right? Like it's connection and kind of tribalism, and you all come together to want to see a certain result, right? And I think there's something about that that's very similar that we're seeing happen today unfold in this sort of digital world as well. But I think sport has
Yeah.
that. It's the ultimate connector. It doesn't matter what background you come from, you want the same result, or if you're for the same team, and if you're not, you're rivals, right? But I think there's something around that.
Yeah, the sense of belonging. No, I completely see that, and I think, I mean, I didn't know you had studied psychology, and knowing that what little I know about you, it kind of it's making sense. Okay, cool. So amazing. I've got a lot of questions about there, but tell me about why climate. What about climate change kind of hooked you?
Yeah, honestly, I would say, and so I've kind of got to the point in my story where I was 36 weeks pregnant, right? Well, prior to that, I was your average human. I knew about climate change. I certainly recycled. I did what I could, but I did nothing extra, and that was it. But having a child changed everything. I kind of call it or liken it to, I don't know what it is actually. It's either a cocktail of mother instinct or a cocktail of mother guilt, and it might be equal parts of both. But it was literally too little sleep mixed with one too many climate documentaries, and I just literally lightning bolt woke up and I was like, what the hell are we doing? We have to get moving. I'm trying not to, put some colorful words into this, but I just realized all of a sudden that we weren't on track. The deeper I dug, the more horrific I found it and terrifying I found it. And I started to act, I started to do, I think, what's really kind of normal and human. And you kind of do what's in your, realm of possibility. And we sold a car. I started to buy secondhand clothing. I got like a worm farm, in the backyard. And again, I was going down this rabbit hole of climate and just found that, these little things that we can do that we're kind of incentivized to do or told to do, they add up, but they will never multiply to what we need, right? Like we've got to hit this scale. It's got to be mainstream. It's got to be in everything we do, and kind of designed by default to kind of work and help. It's just too hard otherwise. We'll never get there.
The cocktail of the mother instinct and mother guilt leads to the light bulb moment with probably the one place where expletives are warranted, which is the way we're treating the climate. And okay, so this is tracking, but now the sort of the out of left field. What was the Web3 sort of trigger?
And at the same time, at the same time I was going through this, and I was I was well down the climate rabbit hole, I would call it. This is the first one I went down. But at the same time, the Beeple's 5,000 days dropped at Christie's, hit the headlines for the $69 million and being all digital. And that was like, you can't help but take notice at a dollar figure like that. And I think the fact that Christie's were involved and who is Beeple and all these questions that you go in and find out. And then I feel like it was sort of like, if you look back and you connect all these dots, again, then Bored Ape was, either just before or just after, but I remember noticing it not long after. And that really blew my mind from I think commercial marketing point of view with what they've managed to do with kind of a brand, but then also psychologically, because I think what they proved is that shared ownership or shared, sharing this IP could kind of like just power these masses to do something like for the collective common good nearly, right? Like we're all in this together. We're all going to make this huge. And it just drew me in, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it that these things were selling. Get this. I remember looking at them going, $1,000? Someone would buy this for $1,000? I couldn't get my head around that. And that's when I was looking at them, and then, phew. Do I wish I bought one? Probably, but maybe not as well, because it was so interesting. It's still $1,000, right? And watching it from the outside was good, because you weren't you were independent, right? Like you could see what these things what was happening. But I think what Bored Ape did was tore up everything I learned at university around marketing and threw it out the window. They just went, nah, we're not doing that anymore. Here's your branding rule book, and it's out the window. So I think that captured me with what Web3 can do, if that makes sense.
It does, and I'm kind of drawn back to the parallels between a sports team and an NFT collection, a well-designed NFT collection, and how, it seems to me like what you're kind of saying is, in a matter of weeks or months, they're able to recreate that depth of passion, maybe not duration, but depth of passion that these children are learning from their grandparents who have had season tickets going to the games every...
Exactly. Lifetime members. You've got people in that club that will never sell. Doesn't matter what price it reaches. They will never, ever leave. Yeah. And that's like a sports fan too,
Exactly. I remember, I can't remember who it was, but a friend of mine, I studied abroad in Buenos Aires years ago, and I remember them telling me, like, the day they were born, their grandfather took them to the River Plate Stadium to get their membership card because he had it from, like, issued on his date of birth, like something ridiculous like that. Like,
who cares about a birth certificate? You need a club membership.
Yeah, exactly. Let's focus on what really matters. Let's mint this kid an NFT that, I gotta say, like, I've got a mixed head about the NFT world too, and I'd love to get your, I don't know. I really think that in order for us to meet this crisis that we're facing, we have to enroll everyone, right?
Yeah.
And I am worried, and I feel a little bit about the same about sports, is that the sense of belonging comes from the sense of the other, right? The adversary, the outside. We have all of our fun crypto memes, and we call each other friend, and we spell things in a weird way. And, like, I get it. I think it's amusing and fun, but I also know that for a lot of people, that's like a big turnoff. And I wonder how you think about kind of that double-edged sword of, like, exactly what makes one person belong is what makes another person feel excluded.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, right? And I know exactly what you're saying. And I think this is sort of the first lesson or learning. And when I was trying to distill where to play in, when you bring sort of NFTs and climate action and trying to, like, get the masses involved, I think, when you're a closed ecosystem or trying to do your own project, you're always going to meet that kind of limit of, I appeal to this person, I appeal to my target market, but I don't appeal wider than that. And I think then when you bring it back to what we're talking about with Web3 technology, and NFTs are what we've seen today are these communities, and you're right, like they're for some people and not for others. But the technology, the smart contracts and the things that run behind it is the secret sauce. That's the power, not necessarily the fluffy layer that we put on top of the technology. Although that I think that's what's going to put climate action into culture, which I think is key, and make it relevant, right? Because now you're talking to a piece of technology that can be shaped and look like anything. You name it. You can't think of all the possible use cases an NFT could have. If we can bake that into action, well then, this is scalable. This can go into anything.
Right. Yeah. You just hit on something that I've always had a real deep respect for, which is the role that culture makers play here, right? The artists, the musicians, the sports figures. Marcus Rashford during the pandemic is able to move the needle on the UK government because he can use his platform and the respect that he's garnered amongst his fans. That I think is, to me, the sort of, we can have all of the policy discussions we want, we can have all of the technical advancements we want, but the real kind of accelerant is going to be the cultural dimension. Again, kind of coming back to that, like, public perception and public, pressure being put on commerce and on government. Cool. So
there's no excuses. Yeah, and there's no doubt we need all of them, right? There's not one thing we
right. Exactly. It's I kind of think of, like, the jaws of regulation and public
the
public pressure
squeeze.
kind of closing. Yeah, exactly. Um, okay, so I'm following, and now here it is. Web3 and climate action. You see people, you had your mother guilt moment. Where did the, hey, these actually might fit together? How did that
Yeah.
leap come about?
Well, I think the more I learned about smart contracts, and we kind of touched on this before, is that I realized that one, they were going to be sort of the building blocks of the future, right? The little Lego blocks that we put into whatever we do in this kind of digital world and digital future. And like when I kind of distilled that, I thought we're on the verge of another technological revolution or a revolution here. Every other revolution has kind of been worse for our planet, you know? Everything's gone to make things slightly worse. We're running out, we've no time, right? We cannot afford another moment like this in history where these things are not designed to fix our problems at their core, like absolutely at their core. You know, it has to be in the fabric of what we're doing. We have to build the future, you know, to reverse the past at this point in time. And I got this kind of, you know, what if in me that went, what if every single one of these could be used as a tool to like fix? And what we built in the physical, digital world was actually fixing the physical world. So, and that gave me kind of, you know, when you speak to older generations than yourself, perhaps, and they go, why would you want to live in a digital world? Well, what if that world was actually better? You know, what if that was actually something that we built purposefully to help fix the ones that we've got, the things that we've got wrong here? And I think that was the kind of power of Web3 to me, going, okay, this change is coming. We're going here anyway. One, let's make the most of this. We can't afford this one to kind of slip away and the opportunity to pass us by. But then I think it came back into this kind of, well, what we'd seen was NFTs, right? And we were the earliest use case of NFTs, which I think is, you know, was clearly a bubble, but also like anything, the hype and then not what the future necessarily will be. But you could see that was culture. Like that's going to drive culture. Whatever culture becomes and culture is, will have these tokens at the core of it. And again, how do you get climate action from a place where I think it's not culturally relevant? It's kind of uncool. Well, maybe not uncool, but like it isn't. It's difficult and it's not easy and it's really not scalable. We've not really done a good job of putting it into a place where anyone can pick it up and go off, and you know, it's not social status or anything like that. But I found there was a way to kind of put the two together here.
I want to get into how you're going about it, but I think there's a really interesting point you made, that all of the technological revolutions we've kind of witnessed have ended up being worse for the planet. And I think my initial reaction was like, okay, yeah, is that true? Yeah, I think that's probably for the most part fair. But I think it's also important to note that a lot of them, and I'm maybe kind of betraying my position as like, you know, white man in the West, but a lot of them have actually been better for people, right? That like, by a lot of measures, there have been a lot of progress in human kind of measures of human dignity, but at the trade-off of planetary stewardship. And I think
that's it. Yeah.
The insight here that we're kind of realizing, which I've found to be a thread woven through Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics, is like the planet and the people, like it's not the
one can't come at the cost of the other. Exactly. It is one. And exactly to your point. Yeah, you can't kind of advance one without, you know, at this point it's always been advance one at the cost of the other, and we have to find a way where we're putting both first. You know, we've got the win-win essentially.
Exactly, which closes down the design space pretty massively, right? Because there are a lot of ways we could improve the lives of some people at the expense of everything else. A lot of people have a lot of different ideas about what is ReFi, and I think anybody who kind of puts themselves out as the authoritative, this is what it is and this is what it's not, is kind of undermining the whole kind of ethos
point of it.
This decentralized. Yeah, exactly. But what I'm hearing from you is actually quite aligned with the way I'm thinking about it, which is ReFi is a movement to embed care for the earth into the fabric of how our society functions, so that it's not something that's bolted on after the fact, using policies, using laws, using tick the box at the end of buying a flight. This is kind of embedded in. It's not optional. Exactly. And I think so this I think leads us perfectly to TRE-Cool Labs and the ERC-Cool Standard, because my understanding is this is your effort to create a primitive, in the sort of Web3 jargon terminology, that would enable any NFT projects to embed climate action at the base layer. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. And, you're right. I'll get to exactly what it is. But, when you look at today's sort of solutions, the closest I can kind of think is like a 1% for the planet. But that comes out exactly as you're right. It's the very end. Once we've made all our profits and everyone's got their shareholding, blah, 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 1% of what's left over goes to the planet.
Right.
And arguably, it should be at the front. That should be the first thing we do. Whenever you want to do anything, you go, right, how do we make sure it does good, basically? And the planet's taken care of, and then build. And so, again, coming at Web3, smart contracts were the obvious kind of starting point. When you look at the layers of the infrastructure and everything, this layer is the perfect one to kind of disrupt, if you like, and make available to be sustainable. And so I've come up with a concept of ERC-Cool, and it's actually so simple. It's not rocket science whatsoever. But of course, in this world, we have, in Ethereum smart contract standards. So it was actually inspired by the likes of other NFT projects. Weirdly, it was Azuki, Meta Angels, and a project called Curious Addies, who all used standard innovations when they launched their projects. Azuki is probably the more famous, and it's the ERC-721A, which was gas efficient, right? So what I've done is taken that gas efficient smart contract standard and then woven in perpetual carbon removal. So every time there's a transaction placed upon mint or secondary sale, it actually automates carbon removal. And then what it does is the carbon is obviously purchased in the real world as a carbon credit. We then fractalize that and actually tokenize it and add it back into the originating NFT. And I think this is somewhat unique as well, right? Because sort of for the first time, we're getting into this like decentralized Web3 ethos of kind of user-owned action. Because again, to your point before, usually it's at the end, and usually it's me parting with my money going, great, I think I've done the right thing. I have no way of really knowing that other than trusting, whoever I've given my money to. And I certainly don't get anything back for it, maybe an email. But, I don't get anything kind of back that goes, okay, I did it, or I can show that off now. I can, So I think there's something there that's kind of Web3 as well. But it'll be stand to be seen. But I think from a psychology point of view, like that changes climate action a little bit, all of a sudden I'm the user, I'm getting something. And I think the timing of it, with post-merge, now it's financially possible to actually make all these transactions, carbon negative. Before it would have been, impossible, 50, $60 a ton kind of thing.
10,000 times more expensive, something like that.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
It was a 99.998% emissions reduction aftermarket.
It's ridiculous.
It's
a
lot more
crazy.
Expensive,
like that too, right? Yeah. And so now it's actually doable, but I think post-merge, what we will see, and now we're in this sort of, this bear market, but what we will see is Web 2 come to Web 3. And we're seeing that already, right? We've got Starbucks, you've got Reddit, you've got Nike, you've got all the, all the big sort of companies. I believe that they were staying out of it because it was a missing, right? And it would be nearly brand suicide to come into a space that was hot, literally. And so now we're getting to the space where that's now moved. We're seeing these brands, now start to build. And I think the time is key to kind of get a sustainable smart contract out there that can be adopted and effectively the gold standard, right? And just let's just all these Lego blocks, let's make them work. Let's put them to work.
Yeah.
Let's do it once. Yeah. Let's never turn it off because it's immutable and it just is going to happen every single time. And that for me is a digital world that I want to see, basically. Yeah.
I think I wrote a thread about this the other day. Actually, this at least in the thread was this idea that I've recently come across called green hushing. I don't know if you've seen this, but
No, I've
it's
heard about it, but keep going,
basically
keep going.
yeah, companies are choosing not to talk about the climate action they're taking, and especially contributing to climate action through retirements of carbon credits, because
It's fraught,
they don't
right?
want to get called out by exactly. They don't want to get
Yeah.
called out by activists. They don't want to get called out for greenwashing and the reputational risk. So a lot of these companies are actually financing climate projects and then not even using it for marketing and
Yeah.
talking about other ways they're working on sustainability, other ways they're working on reducing carbon emissions, but not actually shining a light on this kind of piece of it because of the John Oliver stuff, because of the sort
Yeah.
of public backlash against it. And
Everything that's happened.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And I mean, I think I can absolutely imagine if I was in the Starbucks or Nike innovation department, I'd be looking at this saying, wow, this is so powerful, but we really can't do anything big with this anytime soon because it's too hot, it's too
Yeah.
triggering. People are
Yeah.
going to come down on us. Yeah.
And I think that's like, you've nailed it, right? This is not a sales point. This is not something that I go, yeah, I did it, so buy this thing. This has to be the like thing at the footer of the website going, oh, and by the way, we've put this up front. We care.
Right.
We're doing the right thing.
Right.
Right. This is not a
Right.
reason to buy. The reason to buy is whatever the NFT is, right? The utility as such.
Yeah.
It happens to kind of give you as a user, it's nice. I get this thing and okay, cool. It's doing something cool. It's certainly not the reason to go out and buy this stuff. I don't think it's going to fly off the shelf just because, you're getting carbon credits with it. Right. But, and I think it's a shame. Like, there's two sides to that I have conflicting kind of feelings. Because one, it's like, well, good. This shouldn't be a marketing. Just because you're buying a couple of carbon credits and offsetting something is not really a reason to be patting you on the back, But I think it's a shame that we can't celebrate the things that are happening because there is a lot of good out there, and I think the more good we spread, the better the whole thing is. And it is so fraught with the right way, the wrong way, that everyone kind of gets stuck in fear and doesn't do anything, which is a shame.
On one hand, I completely agree, and I feel like it's a form of a kind of purity test, and I generally am not a fan of purity tests, and I think, and I'm also a big believer that we need everyone at the table here, including big corporations, including governments, including these major institutions, and if we're shutting them down because some of the things that they're doing. I'm reading a book actually right now, which was recommended to me by Mark Johnson from Filecoin Green, who's like super smart guy. I really recommend it. It's called How the World Really Works. And it's by this this guy called Vaclav Smil. And the first chapter was I know, right? The first chapter was about the world's energy systems. Understanding Energy, it's called. And it's basically goes through in like ultimate fine-grained detail all of the energy we're consuming for electricity, for transport networks, for industrial processes, for everything. And he basically lays out that like we can say, oh, let's decarbonize our economy tomorrow all we want, but like the reality is it's impossible. And if we're kind of taking this naive attitude of like, oh, we should do this immediately, it just doesn't actually belie the truth about how our society depends on fossil fuels, right? Like it's truly at the base level.
It's at the core of what we do.
It's at the core of what we do. And that's not something that you can just rip out and replace, right? Like there has to be a phase down and there has to be a transition period. And obviously we want to make that as rapid as possible, but I'm kind of checking myself on some of my naive attitudes around
wishes or dreams or
net zero by 2030. Come on, guys, like, what's the big deal? Yeah, exactly.
No, totally.
So I'm kind of torn, but like in a sense, I think maybe the people who can have the biggest impact right now are fossil fuel executives. You know, the
Yeah.
people who are
Well, we're seeing
in
it.
a
We're
way.
already seeing that too. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I love this, and I think you're right that the moment is right for the Ethereum standard, and this is a sort of opportunity to create a bit of, again, that social pressure of like,
Yeah.
if you're launching an NFT project and you're not doing
Exactly.
your
What's
bit
the excuse?
to,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's the
Yeah.
excuse exactly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so where does the project stand now? Where are you with the ERC-Cool standard?
Yeah. Well, it's just been audited. It came through the audit yesterday, actually.
Cool.
And so flying colors, of course, no problems there.
Naturally,
And so, yeah,
naturally.
we will look to deploy onto mainnet in a matter of weeks. Just get some final testing done and through. It'll go on to a platform called ThirdWeb. Don't know if you're familiar with that, but they put on a number of smart contracts, and they've actually, when I reached out to them, they mentioned that it was really good timing. And I think it's, again, this post-merge world where Web2 brands are coming in, and the first thing that they go was, well, how do we make this sustainable? That's really important to us. And they said the timing for this standard was perfect. They're going to feature it on their platform. I've got like a section where sort of the top ones. This will be the sustainability option. And so obviously, we hope adoption will come from that. But other than that, it'll be about, sharing this around the community, awareness. And it has to be, I think, respected and adopted by the community if we really aim to make this, a standard that is adopted widely
Yeah.
and actually used and therefore has impact. But, even at small scale, this can be really kind of, a big way to drive essentially funds and money to a portion of carbon removal and that kind of industry.
Right. So tell me a little bit about, if I were designing an NFT project,
Mm-hmm.
what would be almost the user experience of like, how would I come across this? What would I do? What would be the ongoing responsibilities I have? How does it work?
Yeah, so a little bit depends on what sort of NFT creator you are and what sort of where you're coming from. But the idea would be to put this contract. I mean, it'll be mainnet and open source. Anyone could, in theory, inherit it. Mm-hmm. So just like you would go and inherit the 721 for your NFT project, you'd instead get the 721 cool, and in that you can make it bespoke. You can make it do whatever you want as well. And you can also choose, obviously, your percentages to go towards carbon removal. And they can be tiny, right? Like even at, 0.5%, these things will operate carbon negative. They'll have good levels of impact, and it's perpetual. So it's not like I have to go and look back and offset and do it once, and then there's no real kind of idea of where it goes through from here. These things are like a little digital carbon sponge. This thing's living and on it goes for its entire life cycle. So obviously then this goes into the hand of the buyer. So you now own this NFT. What you'll be able to do to us is bring it to us, and that's where you can see the cool tokens that are within it. Eventually we'll be able to redeem those cool tokens, and what you can do with them is watch this space. It's a blank canvas at this point in time. But I feel there'd be something there that we can do too.
So is kind of a similar mechanic to a royalty, like 0.5% each
that's
transaction, each sale, each whatever flows back. Okay.
So it's exactly
cool.
the same. So exactly the same extension as the royalty extension that will do the carbon removal. So it was interesting when I was watching the royalties debate come out as well, which was a big one. And obviously from me, I was like, oh, if this goes away, then it's going to be really hard to watch this kind of play out perpetually. Like, yeah, it can do the job it meant, but ongoing, it's a choice.
Yeah.
And I think then we'd go back into the Web 2 version of user pays, and at the checkout, do I want to contribute to my green kind of, vibes and actually do this and go through with it? But I was thinking it could be an incentive too, right? Like if I have the choice of whether it is an NFT holder or purchaser, do I want to pay those royalties, or a seller, do I want to pay those royalties? It could be an incentive if you know that there's carbon removal happening too. But luckily we're not there. Most of the marketplaces now are enforcing royalties.
It almost feels like there's a parallel with how in the art markets, if you cannot demonstrate the full chain of provenance of the ownership history of a painting, its value is, because it could be a forgery, right?
Yeah.
There could be a similar kind of social thing where the NFTs that have an unbroken history of transfers that include this carbon
the royalty the whole way through.
Then that's a much more valuable NFT than this is a sort of pure unbroken NFT,
untarnished.
Exactly.
Has been in the hands of those that don't care.
Exactly. And that's, crazy thing is that can all be kind of, my mind's running to all the ways you could get around that now. So selling private keys is really the main thing I can think of. How are you lining up the first users, right? Like, to build the tech, to build a standard is as useful as the people using it. Who have you been getting interested from, and what do you see as your kind of launch strategy or go to market?
I think when you look at the kind of where the market's going, one thing that's super interesting and who's like leaning on sustainability and always kind of has in the Web 2 world is fashion, right? There's a lot of digital fashion brands coming in now, and they claim like, oh, well, fashion in the metaverse. Fashion in the metaverse, the market is tipped to be 55 billion by 2030. Like, that's crazy, from nearly nothing today to, big money. But so I'm having some interesting conversations there with the brands, Web3 brands. But I think there's definitely a place to play there, like a niche that would go, yep, this makes sense, this fits. This fits our consumer. This fits what we're here to do.
Right.
And of course, like everything in Web3, the best thing you can do is use your own product. So we'll be going to market with, it's kind of like a part POAP. I'm calling it the Mint of Intent, but essentially it's a chance to like a Web2 letter of intent is the kind of ethos behind it. But it's a chance to kind of get in early, show you we're here and mint the first ERC-Cool collection in history. So people can get involved in that if they want. Just head to the website. But
you mentioned this the last time we talked, and it slipped down my list, and it's now bumped back up. If you watch, is this an on-chain mint?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So if my main account doesn't have one of these by the end of the day, then I haven't fulfilled my
no. Yeah, it'll go obviously once we deploy to mainnet, but I'll give you a warning.
Right. Of course. Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. Good. I haven't missed the boat yet. Good.
No.
No, I think the thing that I'm kind of picking up that is such an important piece of this to me is the storytelling, right? And your background in marketing, your background in psychology, it's shining through. And I've been interested in, actually initially a bit of skeptical of the climate change situation way back when, and then kind of did a university degree in environmental studies, went really deep on the science, really deep on the evidence that we had that was kind of showing these multi-millennia climactic trends. And that's kind of where I connected with it. But I've been really having a hard time watching over the last decades, as it seems to me like the sustainability movement has just fallen down so hard on making this something that people can connect with on a human level. And I totally can see why, right? Like, we're talking about atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse
things we
gases.
can't see, touch.
This is not,
you name it. Yeah.
It's not appealing. And this isn't like, oh, this is sexy. But I think, like, to me, that's sort of the heart of the opportunity here. And part of why I'm like so excited about what you're doing is like, you go on what's it, ERC-Cool.org?
.org. Yeah.
.org.
ERC. ERC-cool.org. Yep.
ERC-Cool.org. It's just like the branding is on point. It's like got that sort of like 80s ski
Yep.
style, which
Nostalgic. Yeah.
yeah, I'm a snowboarder, so I like obviously just love that. But yeah, how do you can we talk a little bit about that, like the
Mm.
value and importance of telling good stories about what's happening so that we can educate and inspire people?
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely right. And again, I think this comes to my background in kind of marketing and that traditional kind of brand building sense. And when I came to act myself, I couldn't find something that I resonated with or a brand that goes, there is no brand of climate action. Like we go, there's a, brand a streetwear, boom, you've got 10, that kind of thing. Like where is that space here? And I think that there isn't one is merely because we just haven't kind of started to do the right things behind the brand yet. And I think you're right, because you talk about this, it's not that sexy. You can't touch it. You can't really feel it. Yes, we get bad weather, but we can kind of write that off as that 100-year storm that there's all the sorts of things. But beyond that, I think there's this kind of, the narrative has always been quite negative, doom and gloom. So we've been hit with a stick, told to be kind of fear this, but also this is the future. So it's something that's really hard to conceptualize. I can't see it, I can't feel it, I can't touch it. And you're telling me, it's in 20 years' time, kind of, that's going to get hellish. Well, these all kind of lead to us being disengaged from this and either going, I don't care, I don't believe it, or I'm so scared. Yeah. And I think going back to sport example and all these things, we need these stories to connect, to engage, to actually kind of care about what we're doing. And you touched on the nostalgic vibes, and there's a reason. The reason sort of for that is, I think, is some form of escapism. Like, okay, forget the fear. Let's just talk about kind of the good times. But also, like, I think if you can take people back to those good times, that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for a future that was as good as the past. And that's the world I want to have my kid to have. And you go, even in your lifetime, I used to go down to the beach side. How much more life was there? Every rock you turned had something living under it. It's not the case anymore. We know that things are not going in the right direction. But what was cool was back then. And the sort of the other piece of the puzzle from the 80s, 90s kind of vibe is, I think, like, that's going to be the goal in terms of parts per million, is like, let's step this back decades at a time. Like, we are not going to get from 2022 right back to the 60s immediately. But if we just kind of chunk them out, take them back, keep moving it, keep moving the dial, it feels more palatable and kind of attainable, right? So that's sort of the story behind the brand and why it's like that. But I think nostalgia connects us to what the good times, the happy memories, the highlights, and that's what we're fighting for, right?
Right. That the sort of throwback. I could see. I don't know. I'm just kind of flashing on, like, this idea of dialing back concentrations and kind of like celebrating as we've passed these milestones. Like, hey, it's like, this is when the
and
Beatles,
how you're like,
yeah,
and that born parts per million. Like, imagine when those born parts per million get less and they start to come down, and like. And we're celebrating.
You can't tell, were they born in 1994 or 20?
Yeah, I had no idea now.
Yeah. Well, you're really, really dialing in on something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is, we live in this period of what Albert Wenger calls the omni crisis, right? Mm-hmm. And it's become standard to play to the basest impulses of our psychology, right? Like, even down to, there's a little red dot on my apps, on my iPhone screen next to the app that shows that I need to go, right, which is playing to our, like, poison, like, pay attention to that, right?
That's, alert.
Poisonous frog, exactly. And
don't need that.
And I'm so struggling with this because, like, sadly, fear and anger are the best ways to get people to do things. I just love that this is about being cool, not being, it's burning like run
Yeah.
away. It's like, this is cool.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
move towards this because it's cool
Yes.
and it's
Yeah.
positive. It's a hopeful
Yeah.
message rather than one based on fear. How do you think we can evolve the tools that we use to try to galvanize action here and move past this panic, everything's
Yeah.
screwed,
Yeah.
you need to be afraid, you should be anxious about your entire life, to because it feels to me like if we can't make that shift, then we're just kind of contributing through our the
Like
energy we're
allowing our
bringing
fear
to.
to go out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
want to be
Yeah.
too
No.
woo
No.
woo about it, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. No. No. I totally get you. And like, again, I feel like what I'm trying to achieve here will kind of level the playing field, right? Because if you want to talk about mainstream adoption or mass adoption, the things that we compete with are, all the things that in some ways emit and add to the problem. But, without that, like Adidas doesn't have to sell fear to make you buy their product. They just get to sell cool, right? And actually, like if we flip that script, it's changing the status quo on how we've approached climate action in the past, which I agree is an emotive thing, but it is for some people, and other people just go, shut off, too hard, don't want to think about it. I'll just go back to my merry life and put this away.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think like by making it, and it's the same thing in a different kind of vibe, essentially, but by making it kind of cool, trendy, in with culture, embracing that edge of what we're doing, it levels the playing field and it allows it to play, I think, in a space that is just more mainstream, that it's more likely to be picked up by more people than appealing to just your kind of the niche people that, I mean, I certainly wasn't, but it took me to have a kid to jump into the thing going, right, how do I, sign me up? Where do I march? What do I do? That kind of thing. But that's not, not everyone is going to change their lifestyles. Not everyone is going to, change their diet. All the things that are super hard, like they create, they need behavior change. And we just,
Right.
we're never going to get there if that's the strategy we're taking. We're not going to get there if we need 7 billion people to change their habits. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and I saw someone speaking at the Sustainable Blockchain Summit in Colombia, and I will try to go dig it up because I thought this was such an insightful way to think about really kind of binning people, categorizing people based on their appetite or aptitudes for this, from like, I don't care, never gonna care. That's kind of like, well, then make it so it's not an option. Like by building into every transaction. So every time you send money to somebody, you're doing something.
It's happening.
All the way up to like, I'm on a mission and this is my whole life. And recognizing the intent behind each of these categories to take climate action and the barriers, and trying to figure out how you can modify that threshold over which behavior change actually happens. And and I think, I mean, it's true. A lot of what we're talking about is kind of looking for what I would imagine to be right now probably like the a pretty big chunk of the at least Western population who are like, I get it, there's something going on here. I don't really know what to do. There's a lot of stuff going on in my life as it is. Like,
I'm busy, I'm confused. I might say that I care, or I don't mean it like that. Like I actually care, but when it comes to push comes to shove, I'm like, oh, I don't really know what I'm doing. And do I believe that it's my responsibility to do something about it?
Right. Exactly.
Which is, like we see in the offset at checkout button. I think the stats around that, certainly for the airline miles, is like 1% of some of the 1% of people are doing that. And you understand why.
Right. And coming back to this book too, Smill was talking about how even as renewable capacity has risen in Europe, especially in the last 20 years, because of the intermittency of wind and solar, the actual proportion of electricity produced by fossil fuels has not fallen. And it basically, towards the end of the chapter, he was like, we just need to use less energy. And I think the reason I say this is because it kind of drives back to what we were talking about, this green hushing thing or greenwashing question of if companies and if people are not changing what they're doing to reduce their footprint, reduce their emissions, then the rest, like, that's where we got to start, right? It's like, get a handle of the impact that we're having, adapt our behavior so we bring things down, turn down the heat, right?
So I live in New Zealand, and you actually can have the choice here of a number of providers that are fully renewable. So like all this electricity is renewable. So, you know, that's fortunate. I'm lucky to be in a place like that. And the cost is the same. You know, it doesn't cost me extra to do this. But so it's interesting because I've not really kind of, I guess, sat in the thing where I'm going, okay, everything I'm doing is having an impact. Like, obviously I still, you know, shop at the supermarket. I'm a human. I have everything I do every day has an impact. But at least I guess I can not feel too guilty about my electricity use. But you're right. And I think it takes every level of change here. We need individuals to change. It's just not rational to go, every individual's going to change. And so for those guys, like you said, we have to bake it in. And if that means doing our best to change to all renewables, great, that's what we have to do. But it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take, 30 years,
decades,
which is all we've got. And we have to kind of buy ourselves time if we can, I think, as well. We just have to throw everything at it. Everyone has to do everything. It's like,
how would we get involved with this mint of intent?
So it is by invitation only. There will only be 1,074 of these things in existence. Do you know what 1074 is? It's actually the COP code for negative. Like if you're like, it's 1074, which means negative. So it was the only number I could find that was like, how's this tied? Cool. And how are we going to fit this in? So cool. That's actually not publicly put anywhere. So anytime if you've seen this, you'll see why it's 1074. But it'll be by invitation only. So you can actually sign yourself up now to get, I'll email you the invitation or the password to get access. All will be opening up in a couple of weeks. And honestly, the ReFi community are the people I want minting this thing. Totally. So I will be putting it on Discords and things like that. So, but yeah, you can head to ERC-Cool.org. You'll see a letter of invitation there, which you can RSVP and get yourself on the list to mint. I should mention that it's not going to cost a bomb either. It's like starting at 0.005 and it's a pay what you want. The more you pay, the more carbon removed, the more cool tokens you'll get back. You choose.
Right. Great. Now, and where can we keep up? I know this is TradeCool Labs. Where can we follow you? Where can we follow TradeCool Labs? Twitter or LinkedIn for me is tends to be where I hang out. I don't do too much else in the socials. And Leanne Bats, pretty simple, not that weird on Twitter. And then for TradeCool Labs on Twitter, and then there is a LinkedIn page. It's just me running the show at the moment, so it's pretty boring, to be fair. There's not a lot of content going out. But we also have Instagram, which I like to. I'm just sort of starting, but I'm liking to drop nostalgic vibes. Very loosely related to climate action, to be fair, but the way I try and tie it in is any interaction is climate action. So if you drop a like, a share, or whatever you might do, I remove 1 kg of carbon. So instead of paying for marketing, right? Why do that when you can remove carbon? This to me, I think, is the vision behind Lens Protocol. I don't know if you've looked too much into it. But this is where you can kind of they actually included NCT Toucan. I didn't talk about Toucan, but I've got this.
I like it. Get it in there. Get it in.
Toucan, where you can charge people NCT to follow you, right? And this idea of kind of these micro offsetting embedded in our social interactions.
Weave it in. It's the way. It is the way. I love it. I had heard about this, but I must go and check it out more. I need to
go check it out.
Do some research.
I think it's really kind of worth maybe closing on that. Like, we're in this little bubble, and we all kind of are excited about what we're doing within ReFi, but it's just so obscure. But
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right to be targeting this kind of very base layer of how do we build climate action into the cultural fabric of the internet, right?
That is it. Yep.
Yeah. Leanne, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Definitely looking forward to the next time, whenever that may be. And yes, please do keep us updated. We'd love to share
Absolutely.
out when you launch and support you as you bring this to life.
Yeah, brilliant. And thank you so much for having me, for giving me this chance to share. I think with the community is epic and awesome. And right back at you. I love what you're doing. I love the part that you're playing. And I'm here to support you too. So yeah, it's very cool.
Great. Thanks, Leanne. Thanks.